Lecture 12, Modern East Asia. We will conclude this course with a look at modern East Asia. We will begin with the so-called Asian tigers, which have experienced a remarkable economic growth. Then we will contrast modern-day China and its market socialism with its not-so-distant totalitarian times under Mao Zedong. Finally, we will look at two countries, Vietnam, which is more closely aligned with China of modern times, and North Korea that closely resembles, with differences, the totalitarian model of China under Mao Zedong. Asian tigers. The Asian tigers refer to three nations and one region which have experienced a high degree of economic growth, namely South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. In describing this phenomenon that was not only evident in the Asian tigers, but also in a lesser degree in other Asian countries, Michael Sarel, writing for the International Monetary Fund, states this. Since 1960, Asia, the largest and most populous of the continents, has become richer and faster than any other region of the world. Of course, this growth has not occurred at the same pace all over the continent. The western part of Asia grew during this period at about the same rate as the rest of the world, but as a whole, the eastern half, namely 10 countries, China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan province of China, and Thailand, turned in a superior performance, although variations in achievement can be observed here too. The worst performer was the Philippines, which grew about 2% a year, about equal to the average of non-Asian countries. China, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand did better, achieving growth rates of 3 to 5%. This impressive achievement is, however, still modest compared with the phenomenal growth of Hong Kong, Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan province of China, known as the Four Tigers, because of their powerful and intimidating economic performance. The Tigers have had annual growth rates of output per person well in excess of 6%. These growth rates sustained over a 30-year period are simply amazing. While the average resident of a non-Asian country in 1990 was 72% richer than his parents were in 1960, the corresponding figure for the average Korean is no less than 638%. End of quote. A surprising aspect of this astonishing growth is that, continues Sarel, quote, everyone agrees that the economies of East Asia, and particularly the Four Tigers, have grown spectacularly over the past generation, but nobody seems to agree on why. End of quote. It is, though, agreed that three basic economic facts contributed to the economic growth: more efficient technology, labor or manpower, and growth in durable capital goods, in particular machines, buildings, and transportation. The debate centers around which one of these factors was central. Did the Asian use of more efficient technology drive the growth of capital goods and an increased workforce, or did the mobilization of labor and building of durable capital goods largely explain the growth? Sarel, relying on economic data, argues in part for the former position. However, he also indicates that other factors need to be considered, especially the role of the Asian governments. Some argue that for Asian countries to continue to experience growth, they need to allow greater economic competition, free up markets, and reduce governmental interference in markets. This position is rejected by those who argue that in order to protect their countries from the swings of the market, Asian governments need to selectively intervene. Still others reject both the free market view and the limited governmental intervention approach by simply stating it is not possible to know if a free market or governmental protectionist approach is better for sustained economic growth. After all, it is not possible to revisit the past, create new scenarios in order to determine if a free market approach or a governmental interventionist approach would have produced similar, better, or even worse results. Despite the lack of consensus among economists and political thinkers of why certain countries in Asia maintained steady and high economic growth rates from the 1960s into the 1990s, there are some features that they did share, as pointed out by Thomas M. Leonard, and I quote, "These countries had the following characteristics: a focus on exports to rich industrialized nations, sustained rate of digit growth for decades, non-democratic and relatively authoritarian political systems during the early years, high tariffs on imports, undervalued national currencies, trade surplus, and a high savings rate. End of quote. What is interesting in these observations is that Asian countries grew which exported goods to wealthy nations while maintaining a semi-authoritarian political system. In other words, while these countries allowed economic freedom in order to efficiently export goods, they did not, to varying degrees, allow comparable political freedom. China, Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. China is a non-Asian tiger country, which is currently semi-authoritarian. Its semi-authoritarian political system differs from its previous highly authoritarian political model under Mao Zedong, lived from 1893 and died in 1976. Mao Zedong was a communist who followed Lenin's and Stalin's version of socialism, but with a difference. The similarity he shared with Lenin and Stalin is that all three viewed themselves as hard socialists, who were willing to take violent means to attain their political ends. Mao's well-known quotation, "Political power comes from the barrel of a gun," reflects his hard socialism. Mao differed from Lenin and Stalin, by whom he identified as the main revolutionary people who were to be directed by party leaders. In Maoism, peasants are the principal revolutionaries. In Leninism, factory workers are. Mao came to power after the Qing dynasty fell from power in 1911 to revolutionaries. The following year, in February of 1912, the Qing emperor officially renounced his power. Yuan Shikai then began governing China as a president. Yuan had served in the Qing court and has fought against the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries agreed to stop fighting if the emperor stepped down and Yuan became president. While in office, Yuan became dissatisfied with his role. This led him to announce in August of 1915, despite protests, that he was Emperor of China. Before he could consolidate power in himself, he died in June 1916. After his death, China entered into a phase of political fragmentation, in which the country was ruled in theory by a quick succession of presidents and in fact by competing warlords. When warlords needed food or money, a common way they obtained these goods was by raiding villages, stealing from them, and at times killing whomever they wished. During the time of Yuan Shikai's rule and the warlords' rule, Sun Yat-sen tried to unite China under his leadership. Sun Yat-sen was backed by revolutionaries, and he looked to Russia's communist leaders for guidance, specifically the Communist International founded by Lenin. In 1925, shortly before a unifying military movement called the Northern Expedition, Sun Yat-sen died. In 1927, one of his most prominent disciples, Chiang Kai-shek, gained control over China and ruled it as the head of the Nationalist Party from 1927 to 1949. During Chiang Kai-shek's reign, China experienced a civil war from 1947 to 1949 between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Kuomintang Party and the Communist Party of China headed by Mao Zedong. The Communist Party of China that Mao joined was founded in 1921 with the aid of the Soviet's Communist International. The following year, the Communist Party united forces with the Nationalist Party. Together as the United Front, they fought against China's warlords. Their alliance ended in 1927, the same year Chiang Kai-shek became head of the Nationalist Party. From 1927 to 1930, the Chinese communists, who were viewed as social agitators, were persecuted by the Nationalist Party. As a result, thousands of communists were executed. Survivors fled and hid from the nationalists. Mao hid with his peasant and communist followers in the Hunan Mountains. While Mao and his communists looked to the Soviet Union for inspiration, Chiang looked for guidance from the Nazi fascists in Germany. He even once said, quote, "Fascism is a stimulant for a decline, stagnant society. Can fascism save China? We answer yes. Fascism is what China now most needs. At the present stage of China's critical situation, fascism is a wonderful medicine exactly suited to China and the only tonic that can save it. End of quote. And that is the quote from Chiang Kai-shek. In 1934, Mao led his followers in a retreat from the nationalists. This over 6,000-mile retreat is famously called the Long March, during which only about 8,000 survived out of the original 86,000. During the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945, the nationalists and the communists, as requested by Stalin, once again were united in order to fight against the common enemy of Japan. During World War II, the nationalists and the communists collaborated with one another and with the Allies. The communists naturally continued the relationship with the Soviet Union, which had joined the Allies during World War II. The nationalists looked to the U.S. for guidance and support, specifically in how to defend against Japanese aggression. After World War II, tensions between the nationalists and communists were reignited in a civil war. The war ended with Mao ruling China and Chiang Kai-shek ruling Taiwan. Mao sought guidance from the Soviet Union, specifically from Joseph Stalin, whom he asked advice from. Mao's goal was to rapidly industrialize China. Following the Soviet model, Mao taxed farmers in order to finance his rapid industrialization plan. The Soviets supported his efforts by providing China with technical training and with loans. In 1956, when the Soviet Union was ruled by Nikita Khrushchev, Mao distanced himself from Stalin's repressive political style. One way he did this was with his Let 100 Flowers Bloom campaign, in which people, in particular intellectuals, were encouraged to voice their criticism. The following year, many of those who publicly made their criticisms known were deemed unfit for promotions, and others were even sent to work in the countryside. In 1958, massive work communes were created in the countryside with the hope that China would experience a great leap forward. In these collectives, life was highly regulated, as workers farmed and produced steel. Unfortunately, the work was poorly supervised, resulting in low-quality, unusable steel and ruined farming soil. From 1959 to 1962, a terrible famine occurred, which was responsible for around 30 million deaths. During the famine, relations between Khrushchev and Mao became strained and greatly reduced. For this reason, during the Vietnam War, Mao did not help the North Vietnamese, who were funded and aided by the Soviet Union. In 1966, Mao attempted to reawaken the revolutionary movement, which he feared was being comprised by Western capitalistic thought. This reawakening was called the Cultural Revolution, lasted from 1966 to 1976. During this time, Mao's Red Guard set out to destroy anything deemed foreign to China or representing the culture and customs of the past. Libraries, museums, and private homes were searched and items deemed anti-revolutionary were destroyed. The reputations of people deemed as anti-revolutionary were also destroyed in public denunciation meetings. Sometimes these denunciation meetings including public beatings before the crowds of people. The Cultural Revolution finally ended in 1976 upon the death of Mao. Following Mao's death, the prominent communist official Deng Xiaoping, who had been demoted by Mao, received his authority back. Deng gradually gained greater influence in the Communist Party. In 1978, he became China's foremost party leader. In 1998, he shifted China away from Mao's highly planned economic model to one that was privately privatized and partly state-owned and directed. To allow greater privatization of Chinese economy, Deng ended collective farms and allowed families to own their own land. He also privatized some state-owned businesses. Foreign investors were also invited into China under his leadership. The current Chinese constitution reflects Deng's revision of China's politics and economics. Under his authority, the constitution was reworded to define China as a, quote, socialist market economy. So bringing together socialism and capitalism. Despite allowing greater economic freedom and more political religious freedom, though, China still maintains authoritarian state-centered socialistic policies, as was evident in June 4, 1989 governmental crackdown in Tiananmen Square, the setting of its currency at an artificially lower rate of exchange, and insisting that Catholic bishops are chosen by the government. North Korea and Vietnam. North Korea never transitioned from the hard communist style of Joseph Stalin. Following World War II, as mentioned previously, the Soviets under the direction of Stalin occupied North Korea. One of the Korean leaders during the Soviet occupation of Korea was Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung served the Soviet Army as the commander of a Korean 1st Battalion of the 80th Independent Brigade. During 1945, the Soviets chose Kim Il-sung to rule the Stalinist communist regime they established in North Korea. Stalin was even responsible for editing the 1948 North Korean Constitution, which Kim Il-sung ruled by. Kim Il-sung's reign over North Korea lasted from 1948 to the day he died in 1994. In 1956, about 3 years after Stalin's death, Kim Il-sung distanced himself from the Soviet Union. Khrushchev's attempt to de-Stalinize the Soviet Union disturbed Kim Il-sung and his cabinet, since part of Khrushchev's plan was to decrease the cult of personality that Stalin had fostered. The fear was that Kim Il-sung's personality cult might also be called into question by North Koreans if their country continued their strong alliance with Khrushchev-led Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung was succeeded by his son Kim Jong-il, who ruled from 1994 to 2011, the year he died. He in turn was succeeded by his son Kim Jong Un. All three ruled according to Stalin's brutal, ruthless, and personality cult-driven manner. They also all shared a common goal of being a military superpower. And I'm going to read an excerpt from a Korean woman, Yeonmi Park, who in 2009 escaped from North Korea when only 15 years old. The excerpt reveals the strong military and highly repressive culture of North Korea. I quote, "My father went into the military sometime around 1980, but less than a year after my father joined the army, he got very sick with a burst appendix. His military service was over for good. This could have been a catastrophe for him because North Korean men without military backgrounds are usually shut out of the best jobs. Disaster struck in 1980 when Dong-il, her uncle, was accused of raping one of his students and attempting to kill his wife. In North Korea, if one member of the family commits a serious crime, everybody is considered a criminal. Suddenly, my father's family lost its favorable social and political status. There are more than 50 subgroups within the main Songbun caste, and once you become an adult, your status is constantly being monitored and adjusted by authorities. And networks of casual neighborhood informants and official police surveillance ensures that nothing you do or your family does goes unnoticed. Everything about you is recorded and stored in local administrative offices and in big national organizations. And the information is used to determine where you can live, where you can work. With the superior Songbun, you can join the Workers' Party, which gives you access to political power. You can go to a good university and get a good job. With a poor one, you can end up on a collective farm, chopping rice paddies for the rest of your life, and in times of famine, starving to death." End of quote. Unlike North Korea, Vietnam chose to follow the example set by Deng Xiaoping and consequently shed much of its Soviet-era influence. Reform of its hard-style communism became very evident in 1986 when the Vietnamese Communist government instituted economic and political reforms that enabled Vietnam to be more integrated into the world, politically and economically. These reforms are called the Renovation or Doi Moi policy. The terminology to explain the policy at first was that Vietnam was to be, I quote, "a socialist-oriented multi-sector operating along a market mechanism under state management." This was soon abbreviated to a socialist-oriented market economy. Once again, socialism and communism and socialism and capitalism coming together. Since the Doi Moi policy was implemented, Vietnam has experienced continued economic growth rates, with some exceptions, such as from 1997 to 1998, when Asia underwent a region-wide financial crisis. On January 11, 2007, Vietnam's continued economic development allowed it to join the World Trade Organization. God bless.